the best organizations out there, those that are being thoughtful about AI spend and really focused on outcomes versus the means to get there being first and foremost through AI. I think that's where your savvy HR leaders can have input into a type of conversation around how token usage or AI usage in general should factor into overall comp plans. Is really leading with outcomes first.
Welcome to the Wearable Weekly podcast, where we talk about key topics and trends at the intersection of well-being, technology, and HR. I'm Nick, here with my good friend and colleague, Geoff. Geoff, how's it going?
It's going well, Nick. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Two interesting articles. One, a little bit like kind of left field for what we talk about. It's more of a consumer play, but I think it's certainly just around the general ecosystem that we operate in. It's Fitbit launched a new device called the Fitbit Air, right? Everyone, I think, online, like the buzz is like, this is like the Whoop killer. So I think what's, for those who don't know, Whoop is a wearable device, I think typically associated with like athletes and things like that. You see a ton of golfers on the PGA wearing it and things. What's kind of unique about Whoop is that it's a screenless device. So like it's just literally a band and there's no like visual or kind of like screen that you can utilize. Fitbit Air kind of copied that as well. In short, it's very similar to a Whoop device. You have, 24/7 heart rate tracking. You have SpO2 tracking. So like, your oxygen saturation, all these kind of core features that exist in Whoop exist in this Fitbit Air. I think the only big difference I saw that Whoop seems to be materially better in is battery life. So I think it's 14 days of battery versus 7-day for Fitbit Air. Fitbit Air did look a little bit smaller, so that could explain it. Also, not sure if like the 7-day or 14-day makes a big difference in terms of people deciding, which device they want. The other thing that I think just from the economics of it, where people feel like this is going to be the Whoop killer, is Whoop's current model is you pay an upfront fee. I think it's currently $50 for the device. And then you have an ongoing subscription. And that subscription for the year is in the hundreds of dollars, depending on what tier you get. So it's pretty expensive. And more importantly, it's like an ongoing cost where most wearable devices, you have an upfront cost and then no ongoing cost. The Fitbit Air does not require a subscription. So you can just buy the Fitbit Air, have all the technology, use the app to track all these things, and you're good to go. If you decide that you do want like this higher tier of service, there's this Google Gemini-powered health coach that can be available for $10 a month. You do get that health coach or that kind of upgrade premium for the first 3 months for free. So you can test it out, see if you like it. If it's worth it, you can do it. And if you do decide to do that, it's cheaper than the Whoop subscription. And in theory, the way Google's positioning it is that it could be better, right? Obviously, they own their own AI model, so that creates a lot of opportunity, but it does things like food analysis. So you take a photo of your meal, things that Whoop just doesn't touch today.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, credit to Whoop, right, for effectively defining a new category. I think that's what is so interesting about kind of where things are today with this faceless device category. Is that Whoop was really the first ones to do that, and over time built up enough of customer base and a following, and even just brand presence. I mean, they had several really substantial marketing efforts to tap into the pro athlete market, right? And I think whether it's athletes in the NBA like LeBron, or made a lot of waves in the golf world too, and that certainly helped establish Whoop as this athlete performance forward device. And I think over time, they established that, hey, there is a clear market for a wearable device you have on your wrist that doesn't have any sort of face to tell the time or receive messages or give any sort of necessarily real time on the device insights. And I think the fact that you have, I mean, Fitbit's not the first to try to enter this kind of new subset of the market. I think Polar came out with their own version of this, which I think Whoop actually sued them for copyright infringement. And I think there's another one like Macefit. But Fitbit coming in, with the backing of Google, like you mentioned, is just, I think it's testament to the fact that there is conviction that where we are with this whole wearable device market, there's enough, again, interest in something without, a face on it for Fitbit to make a really, big play for it here, right? And I was even thinking, you have so much, saturation in this consumer device market, and there's so many different watches and things, that you can get to be so highly connected. Maybe with this idea of like a little bit more digital detoxing that folks are gravitating towards, right? We're seeing like the reemergence of old school flip phones and, kind of the anti-tech movement. I could see someone who is even more of like a casual, fitness enthusiast, not necessarily like a, performance athlete, being interested in this to be able to get that health data, but not necessarily feel as connected and have just another device where, you have notifications popping up and, kind of constant monitoring. So I think that combination of, being, like you said, really, competitive, affordable entry-level price point. You have the kind of one-time purchase, not a ongoing subscription fee if you don't want it. The fact that it's simple, minimalist, and again, not overly tech forward, that could have huge consumer appeal. And then you pair that with, again, the ubiquity of Google and all the great insights that you're probably going to get from an app powered by Google versus something like Whoop. It could be pretty popular.
Yeah, I mean, and just kind of like Google, I thought did a great job in marketing it. So I think it's going to have a huge splash. I have not bought a wearable device, a new one, in a very long time. And right when I saw the Google commercial, which I encourage you to watch, it's mostly text, so it's not great for a podcast. Otherwise, we play it right here. We'll throw it into the show notes, the link. But it was a great ad. So if you didn't know anything about Whoop and you just saw this band in this commercial, you go, oh, wow, this is like pretty compelling and really interesting. And then you have this added layer of the AI technology that can come in as like a digital coach. It just seems really interesting. And then, I'm a big NBA fan. I think what they did in terms of like in the lead up to this release was Steph Curry was wearing this band in a lot of the games at the end of the season. Tons of rumors like, what is this band? Everyone could like take a photo of it. It wasn't a Whoop. Everyone was asking what it was. He wouldn't like disclose what it was. He was just testing out this band. Turns out it's the Fitbit Air. They released this, and then you have like the standard Fitbit Air, and now you also have the Steph Curry edition Fitbit Air that's like a extra $20 or something, I don't know. And so it just had a ton of buzz. I think near the end, before the actual release, somehow everyone knew it was Fitbit, so everyone was talking about Steph Curry and Fitbit and all this stuff. So tons of good buzz, tons of popularity. Whoop is obviously doing very well, so it's interesting how that momentum may just try to transfer over to Google. So if you're an employer, I'm always asking, like, what is this? If something is really buzzy in the consumer market, especially around health and well-being, it will, for better or worse, become part of at least the narrative and discussion of an employee wellness program, right? If there is like a fad diet, it somehow creeps in. Often you've tried a good steward of your employee well-being program creates barriers just to make sure everything that's hot and new just doesn't come in. It's more curated. But eventually things become really popular. Wearable devices were not part of employee wellness programs. They blew up in the consumer market. And eventually there are staples now into the employee well-being experience. I do wonder, just thinking selfishly, right? We're an employee wellness company. What does this mean for us? We often get the question as a software company in this world, what happens when everyone just vibe codes their product away? Is your company going to zero? And like, I wouldn't say there's a 0 chance that happens. Like, it's a very real chance, but I really struggle to see how like the average HR person is just going to vibe code the decades of work that we put into our product in a way that really replaces us. That being said, I'm always more concerned about the consumer market doing that in a material way. I don't know if this would happen, but you could see a version of the Fitbit Air being cheap enough and interesting enough for an employer to like kind of, become interested. And then this Gemini-powered personal health coach is so personalized and so unique to each individual that you're not really having a wellness program. You're having 1,000 wellness programs. Each individual employee has their own. And all Fitbit or Google would need to build is some like administrative layer, which is like, how do you get analytics? How do you perhaps give some rewards and reporting, things of that nature? And that strikes me as a probably less likely, than not, right? Situations. I don't think it's a likely situation, but I do think a vision of that world happening and disrupting employee well-being programs where they say we don't need a coordinator to create programming. We're going to use AI to power unique individual programs for every single person, and we will have a layer that gives us all that data to help measure that program, but it's not really kind of organized programming as the way we think about it today.
Yeah, I mean, a combination of the price point, the, again, minimalist design, the fact that it's powered by Google. There's a lot of things that the Fitbit Air has, kind of attractive components for bulk orders for employers. If they decided, we really want to commit to a wellness program, but we'd like to make sure that everybody has a device to, get it off the ground and, have the highest success of enrollment and actually people engaging in the program and getting meaningful data from that, giving everyone a Fitbit Air, like we've seen in the past with bulk purchases of Apple Watches. But obviously this is going to be a much more compelling price point. And again, you don't have there's probably less variability in someone's preferences on the design because it's so simple, and the fact that it's not a watch or something like that, which you may already have, and that sort of thing. So I definitely could see some organizations out there looking to make an investment in their people through some bulk orders of these Airs to kickstart their wellness programs.
Yeah, I'm sure Google will be the first company to potentially do that. Speaking of large tech companies, have you heard of this term called Tokenmaxxing?
Yeah, a lot of maxing out there. I feel like that could be the word of the year for 2026, but I have.
Yeah, exactly. Maxing appended to every word is a version of taking to the extreme, right? And so Amazon's in the news today, but I think a lot of companies probably can relate to this to a certain degree. But effectively, a report came out saying, I think it was Bloomberg who first reported it, but a bunch of news sources picked it up, that Amazon employees are effectively using their internal AI tool, the one just like Amazon built for themselves, to automate a bunch of non-essential tasks, things that don't really need to go through AI and maybe from a cost perspective isn't efficient to do through AI, just to show their managers that they're using AI, right? And showing that they're using AI a lot and very frequently and across all aspects of their work. Now, in all fairness, Amazon has said that AI token usage and stats will not be used in performance evaluations, which are eventually used for bonuses and things like that. But you get the sense from some quotes in the article that a lot of employees are really skeptical about that. Like the general sense that if I'm an engineer and I'm not using AI a ton, that that is going to show up in my performance review, whether my actual performance is good or bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that this concept of measuring output in the form of use of credits or token, or effectively how much you're doing in AI. I mean, it could feel a little bit foreign to some folks who are listening now if product in particular is not your domain, and specifically product at maybe a SaaS company or even just like a larger organization like Amazon, or just anyone even in that kind of echelon. But it is indicative, I think, of what a lot of companies, particularly those that are kind of in the product world, are striving for, is to in this moment of time really commit to trying to use AI in all situations for automation and to increase output. And right now in this moment, right, and we're very early on in this kind of era of AI, efficiency is not the most important thing. It is, again, commitment to that. Commitment to that effort, to put it front and center in all the things that we're doing. So again, if you think about how this could impact your average person in HR, you think about those classic employee performance metrics that help define compensation structures and bonuses and things like that. Token utilization could certainly be one that more folks in HR start to see. And like I said, particularly for those in the product functional domain. And I think the reality there is that it is something that other companies are already doing. We've heard about Meta tying it to bonuses, and not to say that that's the blueprint per se. I think you want the best organizations out there, those that are being thoughtful about AI spend and really focused on outcomes versus the means to get there being first and foremost through AI. I think that's where your savvy HR leaders can have input into a type of conversation around how token usage or AI usage in general should factor into overall comp plans. Is really leading with outcomes first.
Exactly. There's just because this whole token-maxxing thing, somewhere I listened or read something about Goodhart's law. It's an economics principle, but this economist named Charles Goodhart in 1975 effectively coined this principle, right? That highlights how human behavior shifts when like specific metrics, dictate like your incentive, your bonus, your penalties, your performance evaluations, right? The minute you set a metric, and I think the exact line is, quote, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure, right? And that goes exactly to what you're saying. Like if you make the measure your token usage, which I know in all fairness, Amazon's like very explicitly saying that is not the measure, but perception is reality. And it seems like a lot of these employees at Amazon feel like that is a perception. But there are companies like Meta, like you noted, that are explicitly tying AI usage to bonuses and evaluations and things like that. And so if that's the metric, people will optimize token usage. They're not optimizing outcomes. And so at the end of the day, the example I always give is whether you're an engineer or a salesperson, right? You probably can benefit everyone by having at least some AI into your day-to-day workflow, right? And if somehow you are like the Paul Bunyan of sales or engineering and you don't use any AI and you just power through and you're like the top performer, your outcomes speak for themselves. You should be comped accordingly. Your performance evaluation should say that you're the best in that specific domain because you are, whether you use AI or not. At some point, your manager probably comes up to you and say, hey, like you're crushing it without AI. Imagine what you could do with it. But the AI, the metric you don't want to make that everyone optimizes for is just strictly usage, because you're going to see costs skyrocket. You're seeing a lot of public companies already say they've already blown through their token budget in the for the full year in the first quarter. And often that's just not good spend because people are just using it to get the credit of like, I'm just using AI for the sake of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's always, like you said, it'll always kind of revert back to, what the incentive is, or, what the net impact on the individual employee is. So certainly be something to be looking out for as that becomes, more of a kind of ubiquitous situation across different types of companies. That seems like a good place to wrap up for today's pod. So, thanks as always for those who listen. Feel free to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to also subscribe to Wearable Weekly for all our latest insights there. Thank you.